brain pattered against the window of a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. It was a quiet evening in 2025, and Ellie Ramsey sat alone on her worn couch. She was 32 years old with tangled brown hair and a soft round face hidden under a baggy sweater. The room was dim lit only by a flickering desk lamp, casting shadows on a notebook filled with song lyrics she never shared. Ellie worked remotely as a data entry clerk, tapping away at her laptop day after day. It was a safe job that let her stay out of sight. She liked it that way, because Ellie had always felt too big, too much for the world to handle. Years ago, in high school, she had a voice that could hush a room. She sang in the choir, her notes soaring above everyone else. But then came the whispers, the giggles, the cruel jabs from classmates. "You're too fat to be a singer," they said. "Who would listen to someone like you?" The words stuck, sinking deep into her bones. So Ellie stopped singing, at least where anyone could hear. Now she only sang in the dark, with earbuds, in her voice a secret she kept, locked away. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, traced the cracks in the plaster. Ellie loved music more than anything. It was her escape, her way of feeling alive. But love? That was a dream she barely dared to touch. She had seen the way people looked at her, the quick glances, the turned heads. "Who would want me?" she whispered to the empty room. Her fingers brushed the notebook pages, yellowed from years of hiding. Ellie did fit the mold of what people called beautiful. She wore oversized clothes to shrink herself to take up less space. But her smile, when it broke through, was warm like sunlight on a cold day. Few ever saw it. She spent her nights alone, scrolling through playlists, letting melodies fill the silence. Sometimes she hummed softly, afraid even the walls might judge her. Singing was her refuge, but also her fear, a talent she buried under layers of doubt. Tonight felt heavier than most. Ellie pulled out her earbuds and let her voice slip out just a little. "Somewhere over the rainbow," she sang the words, trembling in the air. It was her favorite song from a time when she still believed in dreams. She stopped, glancing at the window, as if someone outside might hear. Her heart ached for more, for a stage, for a love that wouldn't turn away. But she shook her head, pushing the thought down. "I'm too fat to be loved," she murmured, echoing the voices from her past. She closed the notebook and turned off the lamp, sinking back into the shadows. Ellie Ramsey sat at her cluttered desk in her Portland apartment, the glow of her laptop screen the only light in the room. It was a quiet Thursday night in 2025, and she was scrolling through social media, avoiding work emails. A message from her coworker popped up. "You should try Heartmatch," it read. "You're too sweet to be alone." Ellie frowned, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Dating apps were for other people, not her. But the words lingered, tugging at the lonely corners of her heart. She sighed, downloading the app with trembling hands. Her profile was simple. She uploaded a photo, just her face, tilted slightly to hide her round cheeks. "Loves music, looking for someone real," she typed. Ellie hesitated before hitting save. What if they asked for more pictures? What if they saw her? She pushed the thought away, telling herself no one would notice her anyway. But then a notification chimed. Trav Bennett had sent her a message. "Hey, I like your vibe," it said. Her stomach flipped. Trav was a software developer from Austin, Texas. His profile showed a tall guy with short, dark hair and a crooked smile. He wrote back fast, his words easy and warm. "I'm not into shallow stuff," he said. "I just want someone who gets me." Ellie stared at the screen, her chest tight. Could he mean it? They messaged for hours that night, about music, about life, about little things like favorite coffee shops. Trav seemed different, not pushy, not fake. She let herself smile a little. Days turned into weeks. Trav kept texting every morning, every night. "You sound like someone special," he wrote one evening. Ellie blushed, alone in her room. She started humming while they chatted, letting bits of melody slip out. "Do you sing?" he asked during their first video call. Ellie froze, keeping the camera on her face. "Not really," she lied, her voice small. "Just mess around sometimes." Trav grinned through the screen. "I'd love to hear you someday." She laughed it off, but her heart raced. Maybe he wouldn't care what she looked like. 3 months passed. Their calls grew longer. Trav's voice a steady comfort in Ellie's quiet world. He never asked for full photos, never pressed her to show more. "I feel like I know you already," he said one night. "Why don't you come to Austin, meet me for real?" Ellie stopped breathing for a moment. "You mean it?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "I want you here. We could start something good." His words wrapped around her like a promise, pulling her out of the shadows. She lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. Austin was far, a plane ticket would drain her savings. But Trav's voice echoed in her mind, soft and sure. "He don't care about looks," she whispered, convincing herself. She opened her laptop, booked a flight for next month, her hands shaking. The next day she dug through her closet, finding a floral dress she hadn't worn in years. It was snug but pretty with soft pinks and greens. She tried it on, avoiding the mirror, afraid of what she'd see. Ellie spent the weeks before the trip in a haze of hope and nerves. She texted Trav every detail. "Landing at noon," she wrote. "Can't wait," he replied with a heart emoji. She packed her suitcase, folding the dress on top. Her notebook of lyrics stayed behind, too private, too risky. She'd tell him, she sang not fully. "He likes me for me," she thought, packing a pair of earbuds instead. Music would keep her calm on the flight. The night before she left, Ellie stood by her window, rain streaking the glass. She sang softly to herself, "Somewhere over the rainbow," letting the notes fill the room. It was the first time in years she stop herself. Trav had given her that, a tiny spark of courage. She imagined meeting him, his smile, his arms around her. "Maybe I'm enough," she murmured, clutching her plane ticket. She didn't know what Austin held, but for once she let herself dream. At the airport, Ellie clutched her boarding pass, her palms sweaty. The plane hummed as it took off, lifting her away from Portland, from the life where she hid. She stared out the window, clouds stretching endless below. Trav was waiting, she told herself. He wouldn't judge her, wouldn't turn away. She adjusted her sweater, pulling it over her hips, trying to feel smaller. Her heart pounded with every mile closer to Texas. When the plane landed, Ellie smoothed her dress and took a deep breath. She texted Trav. "Just got here," he replied instantly. "Seagate in there." She walked through the terminal, her suitcase rattling behind her. People rushed past, but she kept her eyes down, scared to look up. This was it. Her chance at love, at being seen. She stepped into the arrivals area, scanning the crowd for his face, her hope fragile but alive. Ellie Ramsey stepped into the bustling arrivals area of Austin Airport, the Texas sun glaring through wide windows. It was a hot afternoon in 2025, and her floral dress clung to her skin, damp from nerves. She gripped her suitcase handle tight, her eyes darting across the crowd. People hugged, laughed, dragged luggage past her, but she stood still, searching for Trav Bennett. Her phone buzzed in her hand. "I'm here," his last text read. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and scanned again. Then she saw him. Trav stood near the Seagate exit, tall, with short dark hair just like his profile picture. He wore a gray t-shirt and jeans, his hands in his pockets. Ellie's heart leapt, a shaky smile breaking across her face. She waved a little, her fingers trembling. "Trav?" she called, soft enough to be lost in the noise. He turned his head, eyes locking on her for a moment. She took a step forward, hope lighting her chest, but then his face changed. His brows furrowed, his mouth tightened, and he looked away. Ellie stopped, her smile fading. Trav pulled out his phone, typing fast, not moving toward her. She waited, her suitcase a heavy anchor beside her. Maybe he did hear her. "Trav?" she said, louder, pushing through the crowd. He glanced up again, his gaze sliding over her from head to toe. She saw it then, the flicker of disappointment, the way his shoulders stiffened. Her stomach dropped, but she kept walking, needing him to say something, anything. Dell. Trav turned his back, stepping away, blending into the sea of people. Ellie stood frozen, her breath catching. Her phone buzzed again. She fumbled to open it, her hands shaking. A message from Trav glowed on the screen. "Sorry, Ellie, you're too fat for me. I thought you'd be different. Can't do this." The words hit her like a punch, blurring through sudden tears. She read it again, then again, each letter carving into her. Around her, the airport hummed with life. A family reunited with loud cheers. A couple kissed near the escalator. But Ellie felt invisible, a ghost in the chaos. She looked up, hoping Trav would come back, would laugh and say it was a mistake. Dad. She spotted him across the terminal, walking fast, head down, disappearing through a glass door. He was gone, leaving her alone with his words echoing, "Too fat for me." Ellie sank onto a bench, her suitcase thudding beside her. Tears spilled hot and silent down her cheeks. She wiped them fast, ashamed of the stares from strangers. A woman with a stroller glanced her way, then hurried off. A man in a suit stepped around her, muttering about the space. Ellie pulled her sweater tighter, curling into herself. "I knew it," she whispered. "I'm too fat to be loved." The thought once new, but hearing it from Trav made it real, sharp and final. She replayed their months of texts, his sweet promises. "I don't care about looks," he had said. "I just want you." Lies, all of it lies. She clutched her phone, wanting to text back, to scream at him, but her fingers wouldn't move. What could she say? He saw her, all of her, and walked away. The airport spun around her, a blur of noise and motion. She felt exposed, every glance from passers-by a judgment. Ellie didn't know how long she sat there, minutes stretching into an hour. Her flight home went for days, and she couldn't afford a new ticket now. She had spent everything on this trip, on this hope. She scrolled through her phone, deleting Trav's messages one by one, erasing his empty words. Her chest ached, hollow and raw. "What now?" she murmured, staring at the shiny floor. Portland was too far. Austin too strange. She was stuck. Finally, she stood, her legs shaky. She couldn't stay here, not with people watching. She dragged her suitcase to a corner, found a map on the wall. A cheap motel sat a few miles away, the kind with flickering signs and stained carpets. She booked a room online, her savings shrinking with each tap. Just a few days, she told herself. Then I'll figure it out. She called a rideshare, her voice barely above a whisper when she gave the address. The driver dropped her off at the motel, a squat building under a graying sky. Ellie checked in the clerk, barely looking up from his phone. Her room smelled of mildew, the bed sagging in the middle. She dropped her suitcase shut, the door, and sank onto the mattress. Silence pressed in, heavy and thick. She pulled her knees to her chest, tears coming again. "I'm such an idiot," she said aloud, her voice breaking. She thought of home, of her dark apartment, of the songs she never sang in. Coming here was supposed to change that, to prove she could be wanted. Instead, it broke her more. Trav's text burned in her mind, a brand she couldn't erase. She grabbed her earbuds, shoved them in, but I'll play anything. Singing felt impossible now, a dream too fragile to touch. She lay back, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if she'd ever feel enough. Ellie stayed in that room all night, the hum of the air conditioner her only company. She dealt eat, dealt sleep, just replayed the moment Trav turned away. Her floral dress lay crumpled on the floor, a reminder of her foolish hope. She had wanted love so badly she ignored the truth. People like her get happy endings. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness swallow her, the weight of his rejection settling deep. Ellie Ramsey woke to the faint buzz of her phone alarm, the motel room still dark around her. It was her third day in Austin, Texas, the year 2025, stretching slow and heavy. She rolled over the thin mattress, creaking under her weight. Her eyes stung from crying, her floral dress still crumpled in a heap by the suitcase. Trav Bennett's words looped in her mind. "You're too fat for me." She pressed her palms to her face, trying to push them away, but they clung like damp air. She hadn't left the room much since the airport, only stepping out to buy cheap noodles from a corner store. Ellie worked remotely from her laptop, entering data in silence, her fingers moving on autopilot. The motel walls were thin voices of other guests drifting through. She kept her earbuds in, no music, just quiet to block them out. Singing felt far away now, a memory she dealt deserve. Trav had taken that too, proving she was nothing worth hearing. By the fifth day, the room felt like a cage. Ellie stared at the ceiling crack spidering across it. She couldn't go home yet. Her return ticket was a week off and her savings were gone. "I can't stay like this," she muttered, standing up. Her legs wobbled from sitting too long. She pulled on a gray hoodie, tugging the hood over her tangled hair. Maybe fresh air would help, even if just for a moment. She grabbed her phone and slipped out the door. The motel sat on a dusty road a short walk from a small park. Ellie shuffled along the sidewalk, head down, avoiding the eyes of a few passers-by. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over patchy grass and wooden benches. She found one near a scraggly tree, away from the playground where kids shouted. Sitting down, she let out a shaky breath, the air warm against her skin. Portland rain felt distant here, replaced by dry heat and cicada hums. Ellie, Del planned to stay long, just enough to clear her head. She scrolled her phone, staring at blank texts from Trav she hadn't answered. Deleting his number hadn't erased the hurt. Her thumb hovered over a playlist, then stopped. Music was her comfort, but it stung now, tied to dreams she couldn't chase. She tucked the phone away, leaning back on the bench. The park was emptying out, families heading home as dusk settled in. Then it slipped out, a soft hum, low and unsteady. "Ellie, dat mean toot," she barely noticed at first. Somewhere over the rainbow leaked from her lips, the melody curling into the evening air. Her voice grew a little stronger, still quiet but clear, threading through the stillness. She closed her eyes, letting the notes carry her back to a time before the laughter, before the shame. For a moment she forgot where she was, Trav forgot everything. The song built her tone rich and warm, rising above the rustle of leaves. She sang alone, no earbuds, no audience, just her and the words she loved. "Where troubles melt like lemon drops," she murmured, the sound wrapping around her like a blanket. A few birds scattered from the tree, startled by her voice. Ellie didn't see the old man pause on his walk, did hear the jogger slow down, drawn by the music, drifting across the grass. Across the park, Hank Sullivan stood still, his suit jacket slung over one arm. He was 40, a millionaire who owned hotel chains across the country, but no one here knew that. He had finished a late meeting in Austin, driving through to clear his mind. Parking nearby, he walked into the park, needing a break from numbers and deals. Then he heard it, a voice pure and haunting, cutting through the twilight. He turned, searching for the source, his breath catching. Hank spotted her, a woman in a hoodie, alone on a bench. Her singing was soft, but it hit him hard, stirring something he couldn't name. He stepped closer, careful not to crunch the gravel under his shoes. She didn't see him, her eyes shut, her face lost in the song. "Somewhere over the rainbow," she sang, each note steady and full. Hank listened, rooted to the spot. He had heard anything like it, not in years, not since the quiet nights of his past. Ellie finished the last line, her voice fading into a whisper. She opened her eyes, blinking at the dimming sky. The park felt too quiet now, her heart thudding as she realized what she had done. Singing out loud, here where anyone could hear. Panic crept in. She glanced around, expecting stares, laughter, judgment. The old man was gone, the jogger out of sight. Hank still standing in the shadows, his eyes fixed on her. She stood fast, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Stupid," she muttered, grabbing her phone. What if someone heard? What if they laughed? She pulled her hood tighter, starting back toward the motel, her steps quick. The song lingered in her throat, a secret she couldn't keep down anymore. She didn't know it had reached someone. Didn't know it had changed the air around her. Hank watched her go, his mind racing. That voice wasn't just pretty, it was alive, deep and real. He pulled out his phone, jotting a note. "Find her," he typed. He did know her name. He did know her story. But he knew talent when he heard it. More than that, he felt a pull, a need to hear it again. He slipped the phone back in his pocket, walking to his car, the echo of her singing following him into the night. Ellie reached the motel, her breath uneven. She shut the door, leaning against it. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from something else. Singing had felt good, too good. She pushed the thought away, climbing into bed. No one heard, she told herself, curling up. No one cares. But across town, Hank Sullivan sat in his hotel room replaying the sound in his head, already planning his next step. Ellie Ramsey woke to the faint hum of the motel's air conditioner, her small room in Austin, Texas cloaked in morning light. It was 20-25 a week since the airport rejection, and she lay still, staring at the ceiling. Trav Bennett's words still stung, but last night's singing lingered too, a quiet ache in her chest. She had meant to let it out, not in that park, not where anyone could hear. She rolled over, pulling the thin blanket higher, her mind replaying the moment. No one noticed, she muttered, convincing herself. She dragged herself to her laptop, starting another day of data entry. The numbers blurred her focus, drifting. Singing had felt alive, a crack in the wall she built around herself, but she shook her head, pushing it down. "I'm too fat to be loved," she whispered. Trav's text, a shadow she couldn't escape. She worked in silence, the day stretching long and gray. By afternoon, her back ached, her stomach growling. She needed air again. Ellie pulled on her gray hoodie, stepping out into the warm Austin sun. The park was close, a familiar pull tugging her back. She told herself it was just a walk, a break from the screen. She reached the same bench, sitting with her hands in her pockets. The tree above rustled, kids laughed in the distance, but she kept her eyes down. No singing today, she promised herself. It was too risky. Then a shadow fell across her. Ellie looked up, startled. A man stood there, tall, with dark hair and a calm, steady gaze. He wore a plain jacket over a white shirt, no tie, nothing flashy. "Hi," he said, his voice low and even. "I heard you singing last night." Ellie froze, her breath catching. She pulled her hood tighter, her face heating. "I don't know what you mean," she mumbled, looking away. Del move. "It was beautiful," he said. "Somewhere over the rainbow, right? You've got a real gift." Ellie's heart pounded, her hands clenching. Was he mocking her? She waited for the laugh, the jab that always followed. It didn't come. She risked a glance. His eyes were serious, no smirk, no pity. "Hank," he added, sitting on the bench edge, leaving space between them. "Hank Sullivan. I work with music, sort of." Ellie swallowed her throat tight. "I don't sing," she said fast. "Not for real. You heard someone else." Hank tilted his head, watching her. "I know what I heard," he replied, "and it wasn't someone else." He pulled a card from his pocket, plain white with just a name and number. "I'm a producer," he said, sliding it toward her. "Small time, nothing big. I'd like you to record something just to hear it again." She stared at the card, not touching it. A producer? Here? Her mind raced. This could happen not to her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Hank shrugged, a faint smile tugging his lips. "Because you've got something special." "I don't say that lightly." Ellie bit her lip, doubt crashing in. Trav had called her special too, then walked away. "I'm not what you think," she said, standing. "I don't do this." Hank stayed seated, his tone gentle. "I'm not asking for a show. Just one song in a studio, no pressure." She hesitated, her fingers brushing the card. "I can't," she said, but her voice wavered. He nodded like he expected it. "Keep the card," he said. "If you change your mind, call me. No rush." He stood, tipping his head slightly, then walked off, leaving her alone again. Ellie sank back onto the bench, the card hot in her hand. She flipped it over, no logo, no fancy title, just Hank Sullivan and a number. Her pulse wouldn't slow. He heard her. He liked it. She shoved the card in her pocket, her thoughts a tangle. "He's lying," she told herself, or crazy. But a tiny part of her wondered, what if he meant it? She shook her head hard, walking back to the motel. Singing was hers, not for strangers, not for this. That night she couldn't sleep. The card sat on the nightstand, taunting her. She picked it up, turning it in her fingers. One song, he had said. She thought of Trav, of the airport, of years hiding her voice. Maybe this was different. Maybe it wasn't. She dropped the card, grabbing her phone instead. No texts, no calls, just silence. She lay back, her eyes on the ceiling, then dialed before she could stop herself. Hank answered on the second ring. "Hello?" His voice was the same, calm and sure. Ellie froze, then forced the words out. "It's me. From the park. I'll do it." One song. She heard a smile in his reply. "Great. Tomorrow noon? I'll text you the address." She mumbled a yes, hanging up fast. Her hands shook, her stomach twisting. What was she doing? The next day, Ellie stood outside a small studio, a plain brick building near downtown Austin. She almost turned back, her hoodie hiding her face. Hank waited at the door, waving her in. "Glad you came," he said, leading her to a room with a mic and glass booth. It was simple, no frills, just equipment and a chair. "Take your time," he said, sitting at the controls. "Whenever you're ready." Ellie stepped to the mic, her legs like jelly. "Somewhere over the rainbow," she started, her voice cracking. She stopped, eyes squeezing shut. "I can't," she whispered. Hank leaned forward, his tone soft through the speaker. "You can. Just sing like you did in the park. No one else is here." She breathed deep, trying again. The first note wobbled, then steadied. She sang, eyes closed, letting it pour out. Hank listened, his face still but his eyes bright. Her voice filled the room, raw and strong, cutting through the quiet. She finished the last line, her hands trembling at her sides. Silence followed, heavy and thick. She opened her eyes, scared to look at him. "That was it," she said, stepping back. Hank nodded, slow. "That was more than it," he replied. "You've got no idea what you can do." They sat, after her voice still echoing in her ears. "Why me?" she asked again. Hank leaned back, hands clasped. "I've heard a lot of singers, none like you. There's heart in it, real heart." Ellie looked down, her cheeks warm. "I haven't sung in years," she admitted. "Not since people laughed." Hank frowned. "But want to try another?" She shook her head. Too much, too fast. One was enough. He smiled, small and real. "There, but I'm around if you want more." They met again the next day, then the next. Hank kept it light, talking music, sharing stories. He told her about old records, his love for quiet songs. She told him about high school, about hiding. He listened, never judging, and Ellie felt something shift, a crack, widening she couldn't close. Ellie Ramsey sat in the small Austin studio, her hands folded tight in her lap. It was late 2025, 2 weeks since she first sang for Hank Sullivan, and the room felt familiar now. The mic stood quiet in the corner, a faint hum from the equipment filling the space. Hank leaned back in his chair, scrolling his phone, a soft smile on his face. "Listen to this," he said, turning the screen toward her. It was a music app, her voice pouring out under the title Mystery Singer. She stared wide-eyed. Somewhere Over the Rainbow played clear and strong, thousands of likes ticking up below it. "You posted it?" she asked, her voice shaking. Hank nodded, proud. "Last night. It's at 10,000 listens already. People love you." Ellie's stomach twisted, her fingers gripping her hoodie. "Huh?" "You did ask me," she said low. He blinked, surprised. "I thought you'd be happy. This is your shot." Ellie stood, her chest tight. "I want this. Not yet." Her voice trembled, the weight of eyes she couldn't see pressing in. Hank set the phone down, his tone softening. "I'm sorry. I should have checked. You'll take it down if you want." She shook her head fast, too late now. "It's fine," she muttered, sinking back into the chair. The numbers climbed her secrets, spilling out to strangers. She felt bare, her old fears clawing back. That night in her motel room, Ellie scrolled the comments. Who is she? That voice is unreal. Some stung. Betch is huge. No one this good hides. She shut her phone, tears pricking her eyes. Singing was hers, a quiet thing. Now it was everyone's, and she didn't know how to feel. Her phone buzzed, a new text lighting the screen. It was Trav Bennett. "Hey, saw your song. Amazing. Can we talk?" Her breath stopped cold. She stared at his name, the airport flashing back. "Too fat for me," he had said, then left her there. Now this? She typed slow. "Why?" His reply came fast. "I messed up, Ellie. I was wrong. Meet me tomorrow? Coffee at Brews on 5th? She bit her lip, fingers hovering. He did deserve her time. but a small hurt part of her wondered what he'd say. "Okay," she said, shutting her phone before regret sank in. The next day, Ellie walked into Brews on 5th, her hoodie swapped for a loose blue shirt. Trav sat by the window, his dark hair messy, a nervous smile on his face. She slid into the seat across from him, her hands clasped tight. "Hi," he said, leaning forward. "You look good." She did answer, waiting. He rubbed his neck, eyes darting. "I heard your song. It's everywhere. You're incredible." Ellie kept her face still. "You didn't think so at the airport." Trav winced, looking down. "I know. I panicked. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry." She studied him, the crooked smile she once trusted. "Why now?" she asked flat. He met her eyes earnest. "Because I see you now. The real you. I want another chance." Her throat tightened, anger mixing with doubt. Was he lying again? Before she could answer, the door chimed. Hank Sullivan stepped in, his jacket over one arm. He froze, spotting her, then Trav. Ellie's heart sank. Hank walked over, slow, his face unreadable. "Ellie," he said, nodding. "Who's this?" Trav stood, offering a hand. "Trav Bennett? You the producer guy?" Hank shook it, brief, his eyes flicking to Ellie. "Something like that," he said, cool. Trav grinned, oblivious. "She's a star, huh? That song's blowing up." Hank's jaw tightened. Ellie cut in fast. "Hank posted it. Hez, helping me." Trav's smile faltered. "Cool. Well, I was just telling her we might try again." Hank's gaze shifted to Ellie, sharp and searching. She looked away, her chest a knot. "I need air," she said, standing abrupt. Trav called after her, but she kept walking out the door. Hank followed, catching her on the sidewalk. "Ellie, wait." She stopped, hands in her pockets. "What?" she snapped, harsher than she meant. Hank took a breath, his voice steady. "I'm not just a producer. I'm Hank Sullivan, the hotel guy, millionaire, whatever they call it." Ellie blinked, processing slow. "What?" she repeated, softer. He rubbed his neck. "I'd tell you because I'd want it to matter. But it does now." She stepped back, head spinning. "You lied?" Hank shook his head fast. "Not lied. Held back. I heard you in the park and I couldn't walk away. Your voice, it got me. I wanted to help you, no strings." Ellie's eyes burned. "Like Trav helped me," she said, bitter. "Everyone wants something." Hank's face fell. "Not me, I swear. I just saw you, Ellie, not the rest." She turned away, tears spilling. "I don't know who to trust." Her voice broke, small and raw. She walked off past the coffee shop, fading behind her. Hank, Del Follow, just watched her go, his hands clenched. Ellie reached the motel, slamming the door. She sank to the floor, sobs shaking her. Trav wanted her fame. Hank hid his life. Singing had opened her up, and now it hurt worse than ever. Hours later, a knock came, soft and steady. Ellie wiped her face, opening the door. Hank stood there, jacket off, his eyes tired. "I'm sorry," he said first. "I should have told you. I own hotels, yeah, but I'm still the guy from the park." "Your voice saved me too." She frowned, confused. "Saved you?" He nodded, slow. "I was empty before I heard you, alone with money and nothing else. You gave me something real." Ellie leaned on the frame, her anger fading. "Why me?" she asked again. Hank stepped closer, his voice low. "Because you sing like you mean it, like you've lived it. I don't care about the rest, not your size, not your past, just you." She looked up, meeting his eyes, steady and warm. Her heart thudded, not from fear, but something softer. "I don't know," she said, quiet. Hank nodded. "You don't have to, in here, either way, no tricks." He stepped back, hands up. "Think about it, please." He left her standing there, the door still open. Ellie shut it, slow, her mind a storm. Trav's fake sorry, Hank's hidden truth. But his words stayed, his voice honest in a way Trav's never was. She sat on the bed, staring at the wall, a tiny hope flickering through the mess. Ellie Ramsey sat on the edge of her motel bed in Austin, Texas, the morning light filtering through cracked blinds. It was late 2025 and the past day weighed heavy on her. Trav Bennett's hollow apology lingered, but Hank Sullivan's words cut deeper. "I just saw you," he had said, his voice steady in the chaos of her doubt. She picked up her phone, the Mystery Singer track still glowing with thousands of listens. Her chest tightened, not from fear now, but something new. She stood, pacing the small room. Hank wants Trav. They'll walk away at the airport, chase her song for clout. He heard her in the park when she was nothing but a shadow. She thought of his eyes, calm and sure, the way he listened when she sang. Trav wanted a redo because she shone now. Hank saw her before the light. She stopped, hands trembling. "Maybe," she whispered, testing the word. Her phone buzzed a text from Hank. "Charity event tomorrow night. I'd love you to sing, no pressure." Ellie stared at it, her pulse quickening. Singing in front of people, real people, not a mic in a booth. Her old fears crept in, the laughter from high school, the sting of Trav's rejection. But then she saw herself in the park singing alone. Hank standing silent in the dusk. He believed in her. Maybe she could too. She texted back, slow. "Okay, one song." Hank replied fast. "That's all I need. I'll pick you up at 6. Ellie set the phone down, her breath shaky. She had a day to decide what to sing, what to wear, what to feel. She dug through her suitcase, pulling out a red dress bought years ago, never worn. It hugged her curves, no hiding this time. She tried it on, standing tall in the dim mirror. Enough," she said, soft, testing that too. The next evening, Hank knocked on her motel door. Ellie opened it, the red dress bright against her skin, her hair loose for once. Hank smiled, real and warm. "You look great," he said, simple, no fuss. She nodded, shy, her hands smoothing the fabric. He drove her to a community hall downtown, string lights glowing outside. "It's for local kids," he said. "Small crowd, you'll be fine." She clutched her song lyrics, heart pounding. Inside the hall buzzed with people, folding chairs scattered around. A stage sat at one end, a mic waiting. Ellie froze, her legs locked. Hank touched her arm, light. "You've got this," he said low. She nodded, slow, following him backstage. Voices murmured beyond the curtain, kids laughing, adults chatting. She peeked out, maybe 100 faces all waiting, her throat closed, panic rising. Hank stayed close, his voice steady. "Just sing like you did for me, like you mean it." Ellie gripped her lyrics, the paper crinkling. She thought of Trav turning away, of years hiding in hoodies. Then she thought of Hank, of the park, of her voice reaching him without trying. She took a breath. The curtain parting, the crowd hushed, lights dimming to a soft glow. She stepped forward, alone but not empty. The mic felt cold in her hands. "Hi," she said, her voice small. Ellie, this is for you." She started slow, somewhere over the rainbow, trembling on the first note. Eyes closed, she let it build, her tone rich and clear, filling the room. The crowd faded, just her and the song. A truth she couldn't bury. "Where troubles melt like lemon drops," she sang, stronger now, her voice soaring past the fear. She opened her eyes midway, faces blurring in the light. No one laughed, no one turned away. They listened, some smiling, some still tears catching the glow. Ellie's chest loosened, her hands steadying. She finished the last line, soft and sure, letting it hang in the air. Silence held for a beat, then applause broke, loud and warm. She stepped back, stunned, her breath vast. Hank met her off stage, his grin wide. "Told you," he said, clapping her shoulder. "They loved it." Ellie smiled, shaky, but real tears pricking her eyes. "I did it," she whispered more to herself. The crowd kept clapping, calling her back. She looked at Hank, unsure. He nodded. "Go on, you earned this." She stepped out again, waving awkward, the cheers washing over her. Later, under the hall's lights, Hank found her by the exit. "You were amazing," he said, his voice low. Ellie looked up, her face warm. "Thanks to you." He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, that was all you." He paused, hands in his pockets. "Ellie, I meant what I said. You're enough, more than enough. Will you let me show you that?" Her breath caught his eyes holding hers. She nodded slow, a smile breaking free. Yes. Hank's face softened, relief and joy mixing there. He took her hand, gentle and sure. Good, he said quiet. Months later, they stood in that same park under dusk light, a small wedding unfolding. Ellie wore cream lace, her voice steady as she said her vows. Hank grinned, promising her everything with just his look. They danced after on the grass, her red dress swapped for white, his arms around her. You changed my life, he said, soft against her ear. Ellie smiled, leaning into him. You heard me first. The night stretched on, Austin alive around them. She wa'n't shy, wa'n't small, not anymore. Her voice had found its place, and so had she. Ellie looked back once at the bench where it started. A shy, insecure girl too fat to be loved sang alone, and a millionaire heard her. Now she stood here, loved, whole, free. She squeezed Hank's hand, singing soft just for him, the melody carrying them into whatever came next.